Dawn breaks over Hollandia Air Base, Dutch New Guinea, June 1944. Inside a battered recreation hut, Lieutenant Colonel Charles MacDonald looks up from an unfinished checkers game. The door opens, and a tall civilian steps inside. No rank insignia, no unit patch, just coveralls and an unsettling calm. "My name is Charles Lindbergh." The room goes silent. The Charles Lindbergh, the man who crossed the Atlantic alone 17 years ago. What is America's most famous aviator doing at a frontline fighter base in a war he was banned from joining? MacDonald exchanges glances with his operations officer, Lieutenant Colonel Merrill Smith. They're exhausted. 7-hour missions over endless ocean, landing with fuel gauges screaming empty, watching good pilots ditch in the Pacific when weather forces detours they can't afford. Lindbergh stands in the doorway with a quiet confidence that suggests he belongs here, despite the absence of uniform or authority. He explains that General Hutchinson sent him. Something about observing P-38 combat operations, technical consultation. MacDonald studies him. At 42, Lindbergh looks lean and weathered, eyes sharp with the focus of someone who's spent decades calculating margins between life and death at altitude. But he's a civilian, a controversial one. Roosevelt personally ensured Lindbergh would never wear an American uniform again. "Would you like to fly a mission tomorrow?" MacDonald asks, half expecting refusal. "Yes," Lindbergh replies without hesitation. The checkers game is forgotten. By nightfall, whispers ripple through the 475th Fighter Group. "Lindbergh's here, the Atlantic guy, flying with us tomorrow." Lieutenant John Parody is excited, a chance to meet a legend. Others are skeptical. Can a 42-year-old celebrity really handle combat? Major Thomas McGuire, already a 15-kill ace, wants to see what the old guy can do. Lindbergh settles into a spare cot near the flight line, seemingly unbothered by the crude conditions. Packed dirt floors, palm-thatched roofs, the constant humidity. He's flown in worse. What neither the pilots nor MacDonald know in that moment is that this quiet stranger will crack open a mystery that has been draining their fuel tanks and their nerves for months. Before we continue, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get back to the story. Within 3 weeks, Lindbergh will teach them that the P-38 Lightning they think they know is capable of flying nearly 400 miles farther than Army Air Force's doctrine says is possible. He will prove that every fuel calculation, every cruise setting, every safe operating procedure they learned in training is based on incomplete assumptions. But first, he has to earn their trust. And that begins at dawn, when a civilian who checked out in a P-38 just 3 days earlier will strap into 20,000 pounds of Lockheed engineering and fly into combat alongside America's finest. The impossible is about to become routine. The path to that screen door at Hollandia began 17 years earlier over the Atlantic Ocean. May 20th, 1927, Roosevelt Field, New York. Charles Lindbergh climbs into the cramped cockpit of the Spirit of St. Louis, a silver Ryan monoplane so overloaded with fuel that spectators doubt it will clear the trees at the end of the runway. 450 gallons of gasoline fill every available space. Tanks in the wings, tanks in the fuselage, a massive tank directly in front of the cockpit that completely blocks forward vision. Lindbergh will navigate by periscope and dead reckoning for the next 33 hours. No radio, no co-pilot, no margin for error. The right whirlwind radial engine roars to life. The aircraft lurches forward, struggling under its own weight. Wheels barely lifting off the muddy field. Lindbergh clears the telephone wires by 20 feet. Ahead lies 3,600 miles of open ocean and a prize no one has claimed, the first solo non-stop flight from New York to Paris. What follows is not heroic adventure. It is mathematics. Every hour, Lindbergh calculates fuel consumption against distance traveled. He adjusts throttle settings, leaning the mixture to squeeze every possible mile from each gallon. He fights sleep, hallucinations, and ice forming on the wings. He monitors cylinder head temperatures, oil pressure, manifold pressure, an orchestra of gauges that must stay in perfect harmony or he dies. Other pilots would have flown by instinct, trusting published range figures and manufacturer recommendations. Lindbergh flies by precision. He understands that every engine has an optimal operating envelope where power output, fuel consumption, and mechanical stress reach perfect balance. Finding that envelope requires obsessive attention to detail, the kind most pilots consider paranoid. 33.5 hours after takeoff, Lindbergh touches down at Le Bourget Field outside Paris. 150,000 people surge onto the runway. The world erupts in celebration. But what matters most to Lindbergh is the number his fuel gauge shows, 85 gallons remaining. Experts had calculated the Spirit of St. Louis would arrive with empty tanks, if it arrived at all. Lindbergh's meticulous fuel management achieved economy they considered impossible for a Wright whirlwind radial engine. That flight transforms him into the most famous man alive. But it also transforms him, cementing an obsession with fuel efficiency that will define his technical expertise for the next 2 decades. Throughout the 1930s, Lindbergh conducts survey flights for Pan American Airways across the Pacific and Atlantic. He refines techniques that extend range far beyond manufacturer specifications. He learns that published range figures represent averages, not limits. He becomes one of the world's foremost experts on long-range flight, a specialist in finding hidden capability inside machines others think they fully understand. By 1944, that expertise has nowhere to go. Roosevelt has banned him from military service. The war Lindbergh desperately wants to join will not have him. Until a loophole appears, civilian technical consultant. And suddenly, 17 years of fuel obsession has a new mission, one that will save American lives in the skies over New Guinea. April 1944. Guadalcanal. Charles Lindbergh steps off a Navy transport wearing a Brooks Brothers naval officer's uniform with no insignia, no rank, no unit. Officially, he's a technical representative for United Aircraft Corporation, observing Corsair operations under combat conditions. Unofficially, he's hunting for war. Roosevelt has made it clear. Lindbergh will never wear an American military uniform again. The president remembers the speeches, the isolationism, the America First Committee rallies where Lindbergh argued passionately against entering the European conflict. When Pearl Harbor forced America into war, Lindbergh tried to rejoin the Army Air Forces. Roosevelt personally blocked him, but expertise finds a way. Marine Corps aviation officers at Guadalcanal don't care about Washington politics. They care about problems that are killing their pilots. When they discover that the famous aviator wants to fly and knows aircraft engineering better than most of their technical staff, they make him an offer. Observation missions, they call them. Lindbergh flies with his guns hot. May 21st, 1944. His first combat sortie, a strafing run with Marine Fighting Squadron 2 and 22 near the Japanese garrison at Rabaul. Anti-aircraft fire rips through the formation. Lindbergh's Corsair weaves through the tracers, his 50 caliber machine guns hammering enemy positions. He returns unscathed. The Marines are impressed. Within days, he's solving problems that have stumped military pilots for months. The F-4U Corsair has a dangerous quirk. Pilots keep crashing on takeoff when carrying maximum bomb loads. The aircraft is rated for 1,000 pounds of ordnance. Anything more, and the nose stays pinned to the runway until it's too late. Lindbergh watches the accidents with clinical precision. Then he calculates power settings, takeoff speeds, weight distribution, the relationship between manifold pressure, propeller pitch, and lift coefficient at various angles of attack. He shows the Marines how to safely take off with double the rated bomb load, 2,000 pounds of high explosive. The technique requires exact throttle management and split-second timing on elevator input. Get it wrong and the Corsair cartwheels into the jungle. Lindbergh demonstrates it himself, repeatedly. Accidents drop, strike capability doubles. Word spreads through the Pacific Theater. The civilian can fly, and he solves problems nobody else can crack. By mid-June, Lindbergh has grown interested in a different aircraft. United Aircraft wants him to study twin-engine fighter feasibility. The only American representative in that category is the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. And the hottest P-38 outfit in the Pacific is the 475th Fighter Group, Satan's Angels, operating out of Hollandia. Lindbergh hitches flights through the island chain, Finschhafen, Nadzab. He dines with General Ennis Whitehead, discussing New Guinea operations and his plans to observe P-38 combat. The authorization is informal, unofficial, insufficient by strict military standards. But in the fluid command structure of the Southwest Pacific Theater, demonstrated competence matters more than paperwork. On June 20th, Lindbergh spends 1 hour and 20 minutes getting checked out in a P-38 with the 35th Fighter Squadron. It's his first time in the distinctive twin-boom fighter. 6 days later, he walks through McDonald's door at Hollandia. The civilian who wants war is about to revolutionize it. June 27, 1944. Dawn over Hollandia. Rain falls steadily at 05:30 hours. The mission is delayed. By 10:30, conditions improve enough for takeoff. Lieutenant Colonel MacDonald leads 4 P-38s toward Jeffman Island. Lindbergh flies as Blue 3 on Major Thomas Maguire's wing. The formation is flawless. For someone who checked out in the Lightning just days earlier, Lindbergh holds position like a veteran. Maguire watches him through the turns, through the combat weave, through the diving attack on an enemy barge in Kibos Bay. The civilian can fly. All 4 aircraft return safely. Mission successful. But what happens after landing proves more significant than any combat action. The ground crew chief walks over to MacDonald with a confused expression. "Sir, you need to see this. Lindbergh's P-38 still has fuel in the tanks. A lot of it." MacDonald frowns. They all flew the same mission, same distance, same altitude, same combat time. His own gauges had been uncomfortably low on approach. "Check the gauges," MacDonald orders. "Make sure they're calibrated." The crew confirms. Everything's accurate. It happens again on July 1st. 6.5 hours of armed reconnaissance along Geelvink Bay's western shore, strafing enemy airstrips, dodging anti-aircraft fire, burning fuel in combat maneuvers. Lindbergh lands with 210 gallons remaining. Other pilots from the same mission land on fumes, their gauge needles barely registering. The pattern is undeniable now. The ground crews start paying attention, recording fuel levels after every mission. Lindbergh's P-38 consistently returns with fuel reserves that shouldn't exist. Same aircraft type, same engines, same missions, different results. On July 3rd, the 475th escorts 16 B-25 bombers on a strike against Jeffman Island. After the attack, the Lightnings go barge hunting along the coast. Within an hour, 2 pilots report critically low fuel and break off for home. Lindbergh continues the mission. His fuel gauges show comfortable reserves. MacDonald watches him from across the formation, questions multiplying. Is Lindbergh flying shorter distances somehow? Avoiding combat? Cheating the numbers? But the mission logs don't lie. Lindbergh flies every mile, every combat pass, every dangerous maneuver the others do. If anything, he's more aggressive, pushing deeper into enemy territory, staying on target longer. The whispering starts in the ready room. How is he doing it? Maybe his gauges are broken. Maybe he's got extra tanks we don't know about. Maybe he's not actually burning his guns. But the crew chiefs shake their heads. The gauges work perfectly. The ammunition counters show Lindbergh fires as much as anyone. There are no secret fuel tanks. Lieutenant John Parody corners Lindbergh after the July 3rd mission. Mr. Lindbergh, the guys are noticing you come back with a lot more gas than the rest of us. What's your secret? Lindbergh smiles, a quiet, knowing expression. Cruise control, he says simply. I can show you, if Colonel MacDonald wants to gather the pilots. 2 days after his arrival, MacDonald calls a meeting. Under glaring, unshaded light bulbs in the palm-thatched recreation hall, Lindbergh prepares to explain how he's breaking the laws of physics, or rather, how everyone else has been flying their P-38s wrong. The recreation hall falls silent as Lindbergh stands before the assembled pilots of the 475th Fighter Group. Packed dirt floor, palm-thatched roof, unshaded light bulbs casting harsh shadows across faces exhausted from months of fuel-starved missions. MacDonald nods. Explain how you're doing it. Lindbergh doesn't waste time with preamble. You're flying your cruise settings wrong, he says flatly. The Army taught you a procedure that burns fuel unnecessarily. I can show you how to extend your combat radius by nearly 400 miles. The room stirs. 400 miles? Impossible. Lindbergh continues, his voice calm and precise. Standard operating procedure calls for cruising at 2,200 to 2,400 RPM with mixture set to auto-rich. Correct? Heads nod. That's what the manual says. That's what every instructor taught them. That setting provides good power, Lindbergh acknowledges, but it wastes fuel. The Allison V1710 has an optimal efficiency envelope you're not using. He walks to a makeshift chalkboard and writes 4 numbers: 1,600 RPM, 30 inches, manifold pressure, auto-lean mixture, 185 mph indicated airspeed. The reaction is immediate. That's over-square operation, someone protests. You'll destroy the engines. The manual explicitly warns against it, another pilot adds. Low RPM with high manifold pressure? Major McGuire shakes his head. That's exactly what they tell you not to do in training. Lindbergh expected this. He's fought institutional resistance before, over the Atlantic, with Pan Am, with every aircraft manufacturer that insisted their published specifications were limits rather than averages. I understand what you were taught, he says evenly, and I'm telling you, it's incomplete. He explains the mathematics. At 1,600 RPM, the propeller blades bite deeper into the air with each revolution. The engine works less frantically. Manifold pressure at 30 inches provides sufficient power for cruise without the fuel-gulping richness of higher RPM settings. Auto-lean mixture adjusts fuel flow to the minimum needed for combustion. The result? Maximum efficiency. You're asking us to run settings that will burn up our engines, Lieutenant Parody says, voicing what everyone's thinking. I'm not asking, Lindbergh replies. I've been flying these settings for 2 weeks. Every mission. Check my engine logs. Cylinder head temperatures run cooler than yours, not hotter. Oil pressure stays well within tolerances. There's no mechanical stress. MacDonald leans forward. You're certain? I've flown over 1 million miles using efficiency techniques that manufacturers said were impossible, Lindbergh says. The Spirit of St. Louis landed in Paris with 85 gallons remaining because I understood fuel management better than the experts who said I'd run dry. I've extended Corsair range beyond rated specifications. I've set survey flight records that Pan Am engineers said couldn't be done. He meets their skeptical stares with absolute confidence. The P-38 is capable of far more than you've been told. But you have to trust the mathematics over your training. The hall erupts in argument. Half the pilots think he's insane. The other half are curious enough to consider testing it. MacDonald raises his hand for silence. We'll try it, he decides. Short missions first. Anyone who wants to volunteer can test Lindbergh's settings. If engines start overheating or showing stress, we abort immediately. Lindbergh nods. That's all I ask. Test it. The data will speak for itself. The impossible is about to become measurable. July 5th, 1944. Morning briefing. 6 pilots volunteer for the test flight. Short-range patrol, familiar territory, close enough to abort quickly if Lindbergh's miracle settings turn their Allison engines into molten scrap. Lieutenant Parody straps into his P-38, hands hovering over the throttle quadrant like a man defusing a bomb. The settings feel wrong. Every instinct screams that 1,600 RPM with 30 inches of manifold pressure will grenade his engines before he clears the coastline. Lindbergh's voice crackles over the radio. Set your RPM to 1,600. Manifold pressure to 30 inches. Mixture to auto lean. Maintain 185 indicated. Parody's hands move reluctantly. The propellers slow their frantic buzz to a deeper, throatier rhythm. The engines settle into a purr that sounds almost lazy compared to the high RPM scream they're accustomed to. He watches his gauges like a hawk. Cylinder head temperature, steady. Oil pressure, normal. Manifold pressure, holding at 30 inches. Nothing explodes. The formation cruises north along the New Guinea coast. 15 minutes pass. 30. Parody keeps expecting the temperature needles to surge into the red zone, warning lights to flash, metal to start tearing itself apart under impossible stress. Instead, his cylinder head temperatures read lower than normal cruise settings. An hour into the flight, Parody checks his fuel gauges. His breath catches. He should have burned through a quarter of his internal fuel by now. Instead, the needles show barely any movement. It's as if the engines are sipping fuel instead of gulping it. Lead, Blue 3, he transmits. My temps are running cooler than standard cruise. Fuel consumption is significantly lower. Blue 4 confirms, another pilot responds. I don't understand it, but it's working. They extend the patrol. 2 hours. 3. The P-38s drone over enemy territory at 185 mph, slower than their usual cruise, but covering distance with miserly fuel efficiency. When they land back at Hollandia, the ground crews swarm the aircraft with measuring sticks and gauges. The numbers are undeniable. Fuel consumption reduced by 30%. Combat radius extended from 550 miles to over 700 miles. Engine wear, none detected. MacDonald orders more tests, longer missions, higher altitudes, combat maneuvers, every scenario they can imagine. The results never change. By July 10th, skepticism has transformed into something close to reverence. Pilots who thought Lindbergh was insane now crowd around him in the briefing room, asking questions about mixture ratios, manifold pressure curves, the thermodynamic principles behind lean burn efficiency. Major Maguire runs the calculations with a pencil and notebook. If this holds up across the entire fleet, Colonel, we can escort bombers to targets we couldn't reach before. We can loiter over enemy airfields for an extra hour. We can afford combat maneuvering without worrying about fuel starvation on the return leg. MacDonald nods slowly. We can fight deeper into enemy territory and come home safely. The implications cascade through the group. Missions previously scrubbed due to range limitations suddenly become viable. Bomber crews who thought they'd fly unescorted now have fighter protection. Japanese installations once considered untouchable are suddenly vulnerable. Lindbergh stands quietly in the corner, watching the revelation spread. He's seen this before. The moment when people realized that impossible was only a failure of imagination. The P-38 Lightning hasn't changed. The war hasn't changed. But now, the 475th Fighter Group knows what their aircraft can truly do. July 28, 1944. Saram Island. Lindbergh flies as element leader in a 4-ship patrol searching for targets of opportunity along the enemy-held coastline. The mission is routine reconnaissance until the bogies appear. Bandits, 12 o'clock low. 4 Japanese aircraft, Mitsubishi Kai-51 Sonya dive bombers, clawing for altitude after a ground attack run. They've spotted the P-38s. The lead aircraft banks hard, attempting to reach cloud cover. Too late. McDonald's voice cuts through the radio. Take them! The Lightnings roll into attack dives, twin Allison engines screaming. Lindbergh selects his target, the trailing Sonya, and pushes the throttles forward. The P-38 accelerates like a falling anvil. The Japanese pilot sees him coming. Instead of running, he does something unexpected. He turns into the attack. Head on. The 2 aircraft hurtle toward each other at a combined closing speed exceeding 500 miles per hour. In seconds, they'll either collide or one of them will break off. Lindbergh doesn't break. His thumb hovers over the firing button. 1 20mm cannon, 4 50 caliber machine guns, all converging on a point in space where the Sonya will be in exactly 1.2 seconds. Lead the target. Compensate for deflection, account for bullet drop, mathematics at 500 mph. The Sonya's cowling fills his gun sight. Lindbergh can see the pilot's face through the canopy glass, young, determined, committed to the collision course. Lindbergh fires. The P-38 shudders as cannon and machine guns erupt in a synchronized roar. Tracers arc across the sky, streams of incandescent death converging on the approaching bomber. The 20mm rounds hit first, explosive shells that punch through the Sonya's engine, cowling in brilliant flashes. Then, the 50 caliber slugs arrive, half-inch diameter bullets traveling at 2,900 feet per second, shredding aluminum and steel with hydraulic shock force. The Sonya's propeller disintegrates. Coolant sprays from ruptured lines. Smoke trails from the engine compartment. At the last instant, both aircraft break, Lindbergh yanking the P-38 into a vertical climb as the crippled Sonya rolls left, trailing smoke and debris. Lindbergh cranes his neck, watching the enemy aircraft spiral downward. The pilot, Captain Saburo Shimada, though Lindbergh will never know his name, fights the controls as his aircraft comes apart around him. The Sonya impacts the jungle canopy in a cloud of palm fronds and black smoke. No parachute. "Scratch 1, Sonya," McGuire calls over the radio. "Nice shooting, Lindy." The formation reforms and continues the patrol. 3 more Sonyas are destroyed by other pilots. All 4 P-38s return to Hollandia without damage. After landing, MacDonald approaches Lindbergh on the flight line. "That was a confirmed kill. You want the paperwork?" Lindbergh shakes his head. "I'm a civilian. I'm not supposed to be shooting at anyone. Let's keep it unofficial." MacDonald nods, understanding the political minefield. If word reaches Washington that Lindbergh, banned from military service, flying without authorization, has been engaging in combat and killing enemy pilots, Roosevelt will bury everyone involved. The kill remains unrecorded in official logs. But the pilots of the 475th Fighter Group know the truth. They watched the civilian hold his course in a head-on merge that would have broken most combat veterans. They saw the precision burst that crippled an enemy aircraft in less than a second. Charles Lindbergh isn't just a fuel efficiency consultant anymore. He's one of them. July 29th, 1944. One day after the Sonia kill, Lindbergh flies wing position in a fighter sweep over Amboina Island. The mission brief warned of increased Japanese fighter activity in the area. Zeros from the 204th Air Group have been aggressively contesting Allied reconnaissance flights. The warning proves accurate. Bogies, high 6 o'clock. 4 Mitsubishi A6M Zeros dive out of cloud cover, sun at their backs, closing fast on the American formation. The classic Japanese attack. Altitude, surprise, speed. McDonald's voice cuts through the radio chatter. Break left! Defensive weave! The P-38s scatter into combat maneuvers. Lindbergh banks hard, G-forces pressing him into his seat, twin booms slicing through tropical air. He looks back over his shoulder, tracking the Zeros as they slice through the formation. One Zero pilot makes a decision. He ignores the other P-38s and locks onto Lindbergh. The Japanese fighter is lighter, more maneuverable, flown by a veteran who knows exactly how to exploit the P-38's weaknesses. He stays inside Lindbergh's turn radius, closing the angle, walking tracers toward the twin-boom fighter. Lindbergh pulls harder, trying to outturn the impossible. The P-38 shudders at the edge of stall. Red tracers flash past his canopy. 20mm cannon rounds that would shred him if they connected. He's in trouble, and he knows it. The Zero closes to 200 yards, 150 yards. The Japanese pilot has perfect position, high 6 o'clock, guns tracking smooth and steady. Lindbergh can't see him anymore. The P-38's tail booms block his rearward view. He's flying blind, jerking the aircraft through desperate evasive maneuvers, hoping to spoil the Zero's aim. More tracers. Closer now. Then McDonald's voice explodes over the radio. Lindy, brake right. Brake right now! Lindbergh doesn't think. He reacts. The P-38 rolls inverted and plunges into a screaming dive to the right. The Zero's cannon burst tears through empty air where Lindbergh had been a half-second earlier. McDonald's P-38 appears from nowhere, diving vertically, all guns firing. The Zero tries to break off, but it's too late. McDonald's burst walks across the Japanese fighter's fuselage. .50 caliber rounds punching through aluminum, shattering the canopy, destroying control surfaces. The Zero snaps into a spin and spirals toward the ocean, trailing smoke. Lindbergh levels out at 8,000 feet, heart hammering, hands shaking on the control yoke. That was close. Too close. You good, Lindy? McDonald's voice, calm now. I'm good. Thanks for the assist. They reform and return to Hollandia. After landing, McDonald disappears into headquarters for 2 hours. That evening, he finds Lindbergh in the recreation hut. 5th Air Force wants you pulled from combat operations, McDonald says quietly. Orders from General Kenny himself. Lindbergh nods slowly, understanding the calculation. If he dies in combat, a civilian, flying unauthorized missions, banned from service by presidential order, the scandal would detonate across Washington. Congressional investigations, court-martials, Roosevelt's wrath descending on everyone who allowed it. How long do I have? Lindbergh asks. They want you out by next week. Finish your fuel efficiency instruction, then back to the rear areas. Lindbergh looks around the palm-thatched hall, at the checkers board where this began, at the pilots who've become comrades, at the crude accommodations that feel more like home than anything waiting for him stateside. 1 week, he repeats. Then I'll make it count. August 1944. The mathematics spread like wildfire. What began in a palm-thatched recreation hall at Hollandia becomes official doctrine across the Pacific Theater. 5th Air Force Headquarters issues Technical Order 44-1B to all P-38 units. New cruise control procedures based on Lindbergh's findings. 1,600 RPM, 30 inches manifold pressure, auto-lean mixture, 185 mpm cruise. The settings that pilots had called impossible are now mandatory. Within weeks, combat radius extends from 550 miles to over 720 miles, a 31% increase in operational range without modifying a single aircraft, without adding fuel tanks, without changing engines. The implications cascade across the theater. Bomber crews flying deep penetration raids into the Philippines suddenly have fighter escort for missions they'd been flying alone. P-38s loiter over Japanese airfields for an extra hour, waiting for enemy fighters to take off. Reconnaissance flights push into previously unreachable territory. Strike packages hit targets that commanders had written off as beyond effective range. The war accelerates. General George Kenney, 5th Air Force Commander, reviews the operational reports with something approaching disbelief. One civilian, in 6 weeks, has fundamentally altered American air power projection across the Pacific. He orders Lindbergh's techniques incorporated into training curricula. New pilots arriving in theater learn the efficiency settings before they fly their first combat mission. Veterans who've been fighting for years attend mandatory briefings on fuel management. By October, every P-38 group in the Pacific, the 8th, 18th, 35th, 49th, 475th, flies Lindbergh's profile. Combat loss rates from fuel starvation drop to nearly zero. Mission planners calculate strike packages with confidence that fighters will return with reserves for emergencies. The 13th Air Force, operating from newly captured bases in the Philippines, extends their reach northward toward Formosa and the Chinese coast. Targets that require dangerous one-way missions become achievable with comfortable fuel margins. The strategic impact is immeasurable. Japanese commanders notice the change. American fighters appear over airfields that should be beyond their range. Bomber formations arrive with escorts when intelligence predicted they'd fly alone. The defensive perimeter shrinks as the relentless mathematics of fuel efficiency push American air power deeper into what had been sanctuary. Back in the United States, engineering teams at Lockheed and Allison study Lindbergh's data. The manufacturers had published conservative specifications, settings guaranteed safe under worst-case conditions. Lindbergh proved that optimal efficiency existed in regions they'd marked inadvisable. New pilot training manuals are rewritten. The old warnings about oversquare operation remain, but with critical addenda. When properly managed, reduced RPM with higher manifold pressure provides maximum fuel efficiency without engine stress. By war's end, Lindbergh's technique becomes so standard that new pilots don't even know it had once been considered radical. They learn it as fundamental doctrine, the correct way to cruise a P-38. The revolution becomes invisible through its own success. In December 1944, Major Thomas Maguire, the pilot who first flew wing with Lindbergh at Hollandia, uses the extended range to escort bombers on a 9-hour mission deep into the Philippines. He shoots down 3 Japanese fighters, bringing his total to 38 confirmed kills. He'll become America's second highest scoring ace of the war. He credits Lindbergh's fuel management for keeping him alive long enough to bring those kills home. Across the Pacific, hundreds of pilots could say the same. The civilian who wasn't supposed to be there, flying an aircraft he'd touched for the first time just days before joining them, gave them something no amount of courage or skill could provide: range. And in aerial warfare, range is survival. August 12, 1944. Lindbergh's final day at Hollandia. The pilots of the 475th Fighter Group gather at the flight line, not for a ceremony. There will be no speeches, no medals, no official recognition, but simply to see him off. A C-47 transport idles on the coral runway. engines warming for the flight that will take him back through the island chain toward civilization. Lieutenant P-38 approaches first, extending his hand. "You saved my life, Mr. Lindbergh. I would have run out of gas over the Celebes Sea last week if I'd been flying the old way." Lindbergh shakes his hand. "You saved your own life by trusting the mathematics." Others follow. Major Maguire, who flew wing with him on that first mission. The ground crew chiefs who verified his fuel calculations. Young pilots who arrived at Hollandia skeptical and leave as converts to precision over instinct. MacDonald stands apart, watching the procession. When the others disperse, he walks over. 6 weeks, MacDonald says quietly. "You changed everything in 6 weeks." "You changed it," Lindbergh corrects. "You were willing to test an idea that contradicted your training. That takes more courage than any dogfight." They stand in silence. Two men who met over an unfinished checkers game and became brothers in the only way that matters in war, through shared risk and mutual respect. "The boys don't talk about you like you're Charles Lindbergh," MacDonald finally says. "They talk about you like you're one of us. That's the highest compliment we have." Lindbergh nods, understanding. He didn't come to the Pacific seeking fame. He already had more than he wanted. He came seeking redemption, a way to serve the country that had rejected him, to prove his worth not through words but through action. He found it in fuel curves and manifold pressure settings, in flying combat missions that no one will officially acknowledge, in teaching exhausted fighter pilots that their aircraft could do more than they'd imagined. The celebrity arrived at Hollandia. The comrade is leaving. As the C-47 lifts off, climbing into the humid Pacific sky, Lindbergh looks down at the fighter base shrinking below, the palm-thatched recreation hall, the coral runway, the revetments sheltering twin-boom P-38s that will fly deeper, fight longer, and bring their pilots home safer because of 6 weeks in 1944. He thinks about the checkers game he interrupted, the skeptical faces in the briefing room, the moment when fear transformed into data, and data transformed into doctrine. He thinks about the zero that nearly killed him, and MacDonald's voice screaming, "Break right!" He thinks about Captain Shimada's Sonia spiraling into the jungle, an unofficial kill that exists only in the memories of men who were there. Years later, the pilots of the 475th Fighter Group will tell the story differently than historians. The official accounts will focus on technical innovation, on fuel efficiency percentages, on combat radius extensions. The pilots will remember something simpler. A quiet civilian who asked permission to fly with them, who proved that impossible was only a word, and who saved lives by teaching them to trust precision over fear. They'll remember the comrade who stood at their door on a jungle morning in June 1944 and changed the war. Not through heroism, through mathematics.